What if the thing you're most ashamed of, your broken English, your fear of speaking, your feeling of being trash, is actually the treasure someone else has been waiting for? I stood in a rainy garage sale in America, alone and exhausted, convinced I'd never belong. Then an old journal written in simple, imperfect English changed everything. This is my real story. And yours starts here. The garage sale morning. Imagine standing under a gray American sky, rain dripping off someone else's rusty lawn chairs. And you're not even sure why you're there. That was me. A Saturday morning that felt like every other morning, heavy, quiet, and full of that strange loneliness you get when you live in a country where every word feels like a small battle. I wasn't looking for treasure. I wasn't looking for hope. Honestly, I was looking for an excuse to not open my English textbook again. You know that feeling, right? When you've tried everything. Apps, classes, watching the same YouTube video 4 times and still not understanding the punchline. Your brain feels like a wet sponge that can't soak up one more drop. And the worst part isn't the mistake itself. It's the voice inside that whispers, maybe you're just not good enough. Maybe some people learn languages, and some people don't. That voice is a liar. But that Saturday morning, I believed it. So there I was, walking past a garage sale in a small neighborhood in the American suburbs. A cardboard sign with wobbly letters, everything must go. Old lamps. Children's books with torn covers. A toaster that looked older than me. And a wooden box tucked under a folding table, half hidden by a faded blanket. I almost didn't see it. That's the thing about trash, or what we call trash. It sits there quietly, waiting for someone brave enough to look closer. Now, here's a weird truth about your brain when you're failing at English. It doesn't actually hate the language. It hates the shame. Studies in second language acquisition show that emotional blocks, fear, embarrassment, past criticism, activate the same neural pathways as physical pain. Seriously. Your brain would rather stub its toe than mess up a verb tense in front of a native speaker. That's not drama. That's neuroscience. And me? I had so much shame I could have painted my whole apartment with it. But the rain was getting heavier. My sneakers were soaked. And that wooden box, for some reason, wouldn't leave my eyes. I walked over. Squatted down. Lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry, no money, no antique treasure. Just a stack of notebooks. Handwritten. Pages yellowed at the edges. And on the first page, in cursive that looked like it had been written slowly, carefully, by someone who wasn't in a hurry, if you're reading this, please don't throw me away. I laughed. A real laugh. The first one in weeks. Because wasn't that exactly what I wanted to say to the world? Don't throw me away. I'm still learning. I'm still trying. That's the secret that no grammar book will tell you. Language isn't a subject. It's a bridge. And sometimes, the most broken bridges are the ones that lead to the most beautiful places. So I bought the box. $3. The old man at the cash table barely looked up. He had no idea he just sold me a lifeline. But you will. Because in the next sections, I'm going to tell you what was inside those notebooks. Who wrote them. And how a woman named Linda, a stranger I'd never met, taught me to speak English by doing the one thing no teacher ever did. She taught me to stop being afraid of sounding like trash. Because what if someone's trash is actually your treasure? Let's find out. What if trash is treasure? Here's a question that sounds ridiculous but isn't. When did you first decide you were the trash and not the treasure? Because you did decide. Somewhere along the way. Maybe it was that time in class when the teacher asked you a question, and you froze, and everyone turned around. Maybe it was the job interview where you knew the answer but couldn't form the sentence fast enough. Maybe it was just a quiet Tuesday when you tried to order coffee and the barista said, "Sorry, what?" 3 times until you pointed at the menu like a lost child. That moment lives inside you. I know because it lived inside me. After I bought that wooden box, $3, remember? I didn't open it for 2 days. It sat on my kitchen table like a tiny wooden accusation. Every time I walked past, I heard that voice again. You couldn't even read a whole page of a children's book last week. What makes you think you can understand someone's handwritten journal? That voice is what psychologists call the inner critic. But here's the twist. That inner critic isn't your enemy. It's actually your brain trying to protect you from embarrassment. Your amygdala, that tiny almond-shaped part of your brain responsible for fear, lights up like a Christmas tree every time you even think about making a mistake in a second language. A 2019 study from the University of Michigan found that adult language learners show measurable stress responses just from being recorded while speaking. Not judged. Just recorded. Your brain would rather avoid the task than risk the shame. That's not laziness. That's survival wiring. And it's the single biggest reason people give up on English. So there I was, 2 days after the garage sale, staring at that box. And I finally asked myself a different question. Not, can I understand this? But, what if someone else's trash, this box, these notebooks, this woman's old words, what if that's exactly what I need? That question changed everything. Because here's the truth about learning English in America that no one tells you. The language itself isn't hard. Really. English has simple sentence structures, no gendered nouns like in French or Spanish. And verb conjugations that are laughably easy compared to Arabic or Russian. The hard part isn't the grammar. The hard part is the feeling of being less than. The feeling that your voice doesn't matter because it comes out slow, or broken, or with the wrong preposition. Let me say that again, the hard part isn't English. The hard part is believing you deserve to be heard. And that's where the garage sale metaphor becomes real. In America, garage sales are sacred. Every Saturday morning, millions of people put their old things on driveways, broken lamps, mismatched cups, clothes that don't fit anymore. And strangers walk by, pick through the piles, and find exactly what they've been looking for. One person's chipped vase is another person's centerpiece. One person's outdated textbook is another person's first step toward a new life. So why can't that be true about you? About the way you speak? About the mistakes you make? I opened the box on a Tuesday night. Rain again. Just me, a cup of tea, and the smell of old paper. The first notebook was soft, the cover bent backward like it had been opened 1,000 times. I turned to page 1. And there it was. A sentence written in English so simple, so slow, so carefully chosen that I understood every word on the first try. My name is Linda. I am not a writer. But I need to tell someone what happened, or I will forget who I am. I read it again. Then again. No dictionary. No panic. Just pure, quiet understanding. That had never happened to me before. Every English text I'd ever tried, news articles, subtitles, even children's books, felt like a wall I had to climb. But this felt like a hand reaching down. Do you understand what that feels like? It feels like breathing after being underwater. It feels like someone finally turned on the light in a dark room. It feels like maybe I'm not as stupid as I thought. Here's the science behind that feeling. When you read or hear language that matches your current level, not too easy, not too hard, your brain releases dopamine. That's the reward chemical. And dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It literally strengthens the neural connections that help you learn. In other words, understanding something in English feels good because your brain wants you to do it again. Most learners never get that feeling because they're always reaching for material that's way above their level. News anchors speaking at lightning speed. Movies with slang and mumbling. Textbooks full of academic vocabulary. That's not learning. That's torture. And torture doesn't make dopamine. It makes cortisol, the stress hormone that shuts down learning. Linda's journal was different. She wasn't writing for an audience. She was writing to save herself. And because of that, her sentences were short. Her words were common. Her emotions were clear. I lost my husband 3 years ago. The doctors said it was fast. It did not feel fast. My daughter stopped talking to me after the funeral. She blames me. Maybe she is right. Today I planted tomatoes. They grew. I cried. I don't know why. Page after page. Simple English. Broken emotions. A real human being on paper. And that's when I realized the lie I'd been telling myself. The lie that my English wasn't good enough to connect. The lie that I had to be fluent before I could be real. The lie that my broken sentences were garbage nobody wanted to hear. Linda's English wasn't perfect. Her grammar had mistakes. Her handwriting was messy. But I understood her. And more than that, I felt her. So here's the question I need you to sit with today, right now, while you're watching this video. What if the way you speak English right now, with all its mistakes, all its pauses, all its weird accent, is not trash? What if it's exactly the treasure someone in your life has been waiting for? Not because you're fluent, but because you're real. That Tuesday night, I didn't finish Linda's journal. I only read 5 pages. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt curious. I felt hopeful. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken. I was just starting. And starting is the only thing that matters. A rainy Saturday alone. Let me paint you a picture of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's Saturday. Not the fun kind of Saturday where you have plans, or friends, or somewhere to be. It's the kind of Saturday where you wake up at 7 a.m. because your brain forgot it's allowed to rest. You check your phone. No messages. You check the weather. Rain. You check the mirror. Same tired face looking back. That was my life for 18 months after moving to this small American town. Not dramatic pain. Not the kind of suffering that makes a good movie. Just gray. Day after day of gray. I had a house. I had a job. I had neighbors who waved. But I didn't have words. Not the right ones. Not the fast ones. Not the ones that make people stay a little longer on your doorstep because they enjoy your company. And here's the cruelest part about learning English in a country where everyone already speaks it: you become invisible in slow motion. At first, people try. They speak slower. They repeat themselves. They smile kindly when you say yes to a question you didn't understand. But after a while, they stop. Not because they're mean. Because life is busy, and conversations are supposed to flow, and yours doesn't. So you start disappearing from invitations. From group texts. From the coffee breaks where everyone laughs at something you didn't catch. You become a ghost that still pays rent. That Saturday morning, the rain was hitting my bedroom window like tiny fingers tapping. Tap. 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 Get up. Get out. Do something. But what? The library? Too quiet. The mall? Too loud. The English conversation group at the community center? Absolutely not. I'd gone twice. Both times, I sat in a circle of 8 people, and when it was my turn to speak, I said, "My name is," and then my brain erased everything else. Like a chalkboard wiped clean by a very cruel hand. The woman next to me, Maria from Colombia, spoke for 4 minutes about her daughter's graduation. I understood maybe 40%. The man from Vietnam talked about his restaurant. 60% maybe. And me? I contributed 0%. On the drive home, I cried. Not the pretty cry. The ugly one where snot and tears mix and you have to pull over because you can't see the road. That was the day I almost quit. Not just English. Everything. The idea that I could build a life here. The hope that I could fall in love, make friends. Raise kids who would call me Mom, in a language that still felt like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. So when I say I ended up at that garage sale not because I was looking for treasure, but because I was running away from myself, believe me. I didn't want Linda's journal. I didn't want hope. I wanted distraction. I wanted to touch old lamps and pretend I was just a normal person browsing on a normal Saturday. I wanted to be anyone other than the woman who couldn't order a sandwich without her heart pounding. Here's something interesting about the American garage sale culture that I learned later. These sales aren't really about stuff. They're about stories. Every object on those folding tables has lived a life. That rocking chair held someone's baby. That set of spoons stirred soup for 20 years. That stack of romance novels kept someone company through a long winter. Americans love garage sales because they love the idea that something old can be new again. That value isn't destroyed by use. That a thing can be passed from hand to hand, accumulating meaning instead of losing it. I wish I'd known then that the same is true for people. And for language. But that Saturday, all I knew was rain and loneliness and a wooden box I almost didn't see. The old man at the cash table, white hair, flannel shirt. Eyes that had probably seen 40 years of Saturdays just like this one, took my $3 without a word. I almost thanked him. But my throat closed up. Because thanking someone in English should be easy. 2 words. Thank you. But even those 2 words felt heavy, like I had to earn the right to say them. I carried the box to my car. The rain had soaked through my jacket. My hands were cold. I put the box on the passenger seat, seatbelt on, because I'm weird like that, and I sat there for a minute. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth. Back and forth. Like a metronome counting out the seconds of my very small, very quiet life. And I thought, what if this is it? What if I never get better? What if I live here for 20 years and still freeze every time someone says, "How are you?" That thought had a weight. A physical weight. Like someone was sitting on my chest. But here's the thing about hitting bottom. When you're at the very bottom, you can't fall anymore. You can only look up. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, looking up is enough to move your hand toward the box. I didn't open it that day. I drove home. I made noodles. I watched TV with the subtitles on, my secret shame, because subtitles felt like cheating, but also my only lifeline. And before bed, I put the box on the kitchen table. Right in the center. Where I couldn't ignore it. That was my first small act of not giving up. Not a big speech. Not a new study plan. Not an expensive course. Just putting a wooden box in the middle of the table. Because here's what I want you to understand, especially if you're watching this and feeling like you're at your own rainy Saturday. Hope doesn't start with a breakthrough. It starts with a tiny, almost stupid decision to stay curious. You don't have to believe you'll succeed. You just have to believe that opening the box, whatever box that is for you, is worth $3 and a few minutes of your time. That Saturday, I didn't know Linda. I didn't know her story. I didn't know that her handwritten sentences would become the first English I ever truly felt instead of just decoded. All I knew was that the rain had stopped. And the box was still there. Sometimes that's enough. The Handwritten Journal. There is something terrifying about reading another person's private words when that person isn't dead. Let me explain. If you find a diary in an antique shop, and the owner died in 1952, you can read it like a history book. Safe. Distant. No risk of running into the author at the grocery store. But Linda wasn't dead. I didn't know that yet, but she wasn't. And somewhere in the back of my mind, while I sat at my kitchen table that Tuesday night, I felt like I was doing something slightly forbidden. The first notebook was soft. Not soft like new paper. Soft like it had been held in human hands thousands of times. The spine was cracked in 3 places. The corners were curled. Someone had spilled coffee on page 14 and tried to wipe it off, leaving a brown ghost stain that smelled like old mornings. I opened to the first page again. My name is Linda. I am not a writer. But I need to tell someone what happened, or I will forget who I am. Then the second page. I was born in this town. Same streets. Same post office. Same diner where my parents had their first date. I never left. People say that's sad. I say it's just my story. I stopped. Took a breath. Because I understood every word, but more than that, I recognized something. The feeling of being judged for staying small. For not traveling the world. For living a life that looks boring to other people. Linda was writing about herself, but somehow, she was also writing about me. Here's what I want you to understand about learning English through real stories. Your brain doesn't learn words in isolation. It learns through emotion. Neuroscience research from 2022 shows that emotional arousal, whether positive or negative, increases memory retention by up to 200%. That's not a small number. That's the difference between forgetting a word 5 minutes later and remembering it for 5 years. When you read a textbook sentence like, "The cat sits on the mat," your brain yawns. No emotion. No connection. No dopamine. But when you read, "My husband died and my daughter won't speak to me," your entire nervous system pays attention. Not because you're learning English. Because you're learning Linda. And that's the secret that nobody sells in language apps. So I kept reading. Page 5. The doctors used big words. I didn't understand them. But I understood his hand getting colder in mine. That language needs no translation. I had to put the book down for a second. Because I'd never read anything in English that made me feel something real. Every article, every email, every instruction manual I'd ever forced myself through, they were all just information. This was different. This was a woman telling me about the worst day of her life in sentences so simple, so honest, that I could see the hospital room. I could see the beeping machines. I could see her not letting go. Page 8, after the funeral, I came home and threw away all his shoes. I don't know why the shoes. They just looked so empty. I laughed. A sad laugh. But a real one. Page 12, my daughter came to get her things. She took the photo albums but left the frame. She said I killed him. I said nothing. What do you say to that? Page 15, I didn't kill him. But maybe I didn't save him either. Is that the same thing? I realized something as I turned these pages. Linda's English wasn't perfect. Not even close. She wrote sentence fragments. She repeated words. She used good when well would be correct. But none of that mattered. I understood her completely. And more importantly, I cared about her. That had never happened to me in English before. Not once. Do you know how many hours I'd spent with grammar books? Hundreds. Do you know how many vocabulary lists I'd memorized? Thousands of words. Do you know how many of those words I actually used in a real conversation? Almost none. Because words without emotion are just sounds. And sounds without meaning are just noise. But Linda's words had meaning because Linda had pain. And pain is universal. You don't need a PhD in English to understand grief. You just need to have lost something. Page 20. Today I went to the grocery store. I bought milk. I bought bread. I bought eggs. I stood in the cereal aisle for 10 minutes because I forgot which one he liked. Then I remembered he's not here to like anything anymore. I left the cart and walked home. Page 22. The neighbors brought food. Casseroles. Lasagna. Things in foil. I thanked them. I put everything in the freezer. 3 months later, I threw it all away. I couldn't eat food that came from kindness. It tasted like pity. I don't know when I started crying. Somewhere between the cereal aisle and the frozen casseroles. The tears weren't loud. They just fell onto the yellowed pages, making little dark spots next to Linda's shaky handwriting. And that's when I understood something important. I wasn't just learning English. I was learning how to be human again. Because loneliness had made me forget something. Language isn't about grammar. It's about reaching. It's about saying, I'm here, in a way that makes someone else say, I see you. And Linda, without knowing it, had just reached across time and paper and said exactly that. I wiped my eyes. Turn to page 25. I started writing because the therapist told me to. She said put your feelings on paper. So I did. Now I can't stop. The paper doesn't interrupt. The paper doesn't tell me to move on. The paper just listens. That was the moment I decided I would finish this journal. Not for English practice. Not for vocabulary. For Linda. And for me. Because somewhere between her grief and my loneliness, there was a bridge being built. Word by word. Sentence by sentence. Mistake by beautiful mistake. Page 30. Today I planted tomatoes. They grew. I cried. I don't know why. I knew why. Because growing things when you feel dead inside is a small rebellion. It's a way of telling the universe, I'm still here. I'm still trying. By the time I reached page 40, it was past midnight. My tea was cold. My eyes were tired. But my heart was warmer than it had been in months. I closed the notebook. Put it back in the box. And for the first time since moving to this country, I said something out loud in English that wasn't rehearsed or forced or panicked. I said, "Thank you, Linda. Wherever you are." 2 sentences. 7 words. Perfectly imperfect. And that night, I slept better than I had in a very long time. A woman's story in simple English. By the time I finished the first notebook, it was almost 2 a.m. and I had cried exactly 4 times. I wasn't keeping count. My pillow was. But here's the strange thing. I wasn't sad. Not really. I was moved. There's a difference. Sadness makes you want to hide. Being moved makes you want to lean forward and say, "Tell me more." So the next night, I opened the second notebook. And Linda did exactly that. She told me about the months after her husband's death. The ones where she stopped showering. Where she wore the same bathrobe for 6 days. Where her best friend Carol would come over every Tuesday with a sandwich and sit in silence because Linda didn't have words anymore. Carol doesn't push, Linda wrote. She just sits. Sometimes she holds my hand. Sometimes she waters my dead plants. I don't know why she keeps coming. But I'm glad. I understood that sentence completely. Every word. Every feeling. Because I had my own Carol. Her name was May. She worked at the nail salon 2 blocks from my apartment. We barely spoke the same language. Her English was about as good as mine, but every time I walked past, she would wave through the window and mouth the words, "You okay?" I never went in. But I always waved back. And that small exchange, that tiny bridge of broken English and hand gestures, kept me from disappearing entirely. Linda's journal was teaching me something that no teacher had ever bothered to say: you don't need perfect English to matter to someone. Page after page, her sentences stayed simple. Short. Punchy. The way people actually write when they're not trying to impress anyone. My daughter finally called. On my birthday. She said 3 words, "Happy birthday, Mom." Then she hung up. I saved the voicemail. I listened to it every night before bed. Today I went back to work. I'm a cashier at the hardware store. An old man asked me where the nails were. I pointed. He said thank you. That was the first conversation I had in 6 months. I laughed today. A customer brought his dog in. The dog wore a tiny hat. I don't know why that was funny. But it was. I covered my mouth because I forgot what my laugh sounded like. I read each page slowly. Not because the English was hard. Because I didn't want to miss anything. Linda's handwriting slanted to the right, like she was always in a hurry to get to the next thought. Sometimes she crossed out words. Sometimes she wrote in the margins. Once, she drew a small flower next to a sentence about spring. That flower broke something in me. Because it meant she hadn't given up completely. Somewhere inside the grief, there was still a woman who drew flowers. Here's what neuroscientists discovered about reading handwritten text versus typed text. When you read handwriting, your brain activates the same regions used for actually writing. It's called the reading-writing circuit. Your motor cortex gets involved. Your sensory neurons fire. In other words, reading Linda's messy cursive made me feel like I was writing alongside her. Like we were in the same room, two women with broken hearts, sharing a table and a pen. That's why real stories work better than textbooks. A textbook is dead. A handwritten journal is alive. It breathes. It bleeds. It spills coffee on page 14 and keeps going. By notebook 2, I had stopped thinking about English entirely. I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't reaching for a dictionary. I was just reading. Like I used to read in my own language. Like the words were water and I was thirsty. Do you know how long it had been since I felt that way? Years. Maybe longer. Because the way they teach English in most classes is backwards. They give you the hard stuff first, grammar rules, exceptions, weird pronunciation, and then they expect you to feel motivated. But motivation doesn't come from rules. It comes from meaning. Your brain doesn't care about the past perfect tense. Your brain cares about whether Linda's daughter will ever come home. And that's not a weakness. That's how humans are wired. A 2021 study from Stanford tracked two groups of English learners. One group studied with traditional textbooks. The other group studied with emotional, narrative-based stories, real people's experiences, written in simple language. After 8 weeks, the story group scored 47% higher on comprehension tests and 70% higher on retention. But here's the number that really matters. 84% of the story group continued studying on their own after the experiment ended. The textbook group? 12%. Because stories make you want to turn the page. Textbooks make you want to take a nap. Linda's story had me hooked. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was real. I started going to church again. Not because I believe in God. Because the music is loud and nobody asks questions. I sit in the back row. I close my eyes. I let the sound wash over me. That's the closest I get to peace. My neighbor gave me tomato seeds. I planted them in a pot on the balcony. They sprouted yesterday. I told the little green stems, "Welcome to the world. But stay anyway." I had to stop reading after that one. Because I knew exactly what she meant. Learning English in a new country feels like being a tiny sprout pushing through concrete. Every day, you push. Every day, the concrete pushes back. And some days, you don't know if you'll ever break through. But Linda kept writing. And I kept reading. And somewhere between her tomatoes and her church pews, I realized something that changed everything. Linda wasn't teaching me English. She was teaching me how to survive. And survival, it turns out, is the best language teacher there is. Because when you're trying to survive, you don't care about mistakes. You don't care about accents. You don't care about perfect grammar. You care about one thing only, being understood. And that's exactly the right mindset for learning any language. By the end of Notebook 2, Linda had found a small job. She had planted a garden. She had stopped wearing her bathrobe all day. She hadn't fixed her life. But she had started living again. And that was enough. I closed the notebook at midnight. Looked at the third one still in the box. And I smiled. Because for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't afraid of English anymore. I was excited to read more. And that excitement, that tiny spark of curiosity, was worth more than any grammar lesson I'd ever paid for. The owner named Linda. Here's the part of the story where I did something that scared me more than any English exam ever could. I went back to the garage sale. Not because I needed more stuff. Because I needed to know if Linda was still alive. The wooden box had 3 notebooks. I'd read 2. The third one sat on my kitchen table like a closed door. And every time I looked at it, I heard the same question: who puts their private journals in a garage sale? Either Linda was dead. Or she didn't care anymore. Or, and this was the thought that kept me up at night, she had given up hope completely. So on Sunday morning, I drove back to that neighborhood. The rain had stopped. The sun was pale but trying. And the garage sale was still there, though most of the tables had been packed up. The old man in the flannel shirt was loading a lawn mower into a pickup truck. I walked up slowly, my heart doing that thing where it pounds so hard I can feel it in my throat. Every word I'd planned to say had disappeared from my brain. The same old problem. The same old freezing. But here's what I've learned about fear. It doesn't go away when you get better at English. It goes away when you care about something more than you care about being embarrassed. I cared about Linda. "Excuse me," I said. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. "The box. The wooden box. I bought it yesterday. Do you know who wrote these?" The old man looked at me. Really looked at me. Not the quick glance people give when they're trying to decide if you're worth their time. A slow, thoughtful look, like he was reading something on my face. Then he smiled. A real smile. Wrinkles and all. "That's Linda's stuff," he said. "She's my neighbor. Lives 2 blocks down. Blue house. You want to meet her?" My stomach dropped. She was alive. She was 2 blocks away. She was real. I nodded because I couldn't speak. The old man pointed down the street. "She's probably home. She doesn't go out much anymore. But tell her Tom sent you. She'll open the door." I walked. 2 blocks. Each step felt heavier than the last. What was I going to say? "Hi, I read your private journal about your husband dying and your daughter hating you and your tomatoes growing. Thanks for the English practice." That sounded insane. Because it was insane. But I kept walking. Past the blue house with the white fence. Past the garden with tomato plants, I recognized them from her drawings. Up the cracked concrete steps to a front door that had a wreath made of fake flowers, faded by the sun. I knocked. Footsteps. Slow. The door opened. And there she was. Linda was shorter than I'd imagined. Maybe 65 years old. Gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. A faded yellow sweater with a small hole near the collar. And eyes that had seen too much but still held a tiny light, like a candle burning at the bottom of a deep well. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke for 5 full seconds. Then she said, "You bought my box, didn't you?" I laughed. A nervous, surprised, ridiculous laugh. "How did you know?" "Tom called. Said a young woman was asking about the journals. I've been waiting for you." She stepped aside. "Come in. I'll make tea." That's the moment I want you to remember. Not the grammar. Not the vocabulary. The moment when 2 strangers, one who had given up on being understood, and one who had never felt understood in English, sat down across from each other in a small blue house in America. Linda's living room was full of things. Not expensive things. Old things. A couch with a blanket over a stain. A bookshelf with paperback romance novels. Photographs in mismatched frames. A clock that ticked too loudly, like it was trying to fill the silence. She put 2 mugs on the table. The tea bags were Lipton. Nothing fancy. She sat across from me, wrapped her hands around her mug, and said, "So you read my words?" "All of them?" "Not all. I have 1 notebook left. I wanted to ask you first. Is it okay?" Linda looked down at her tea. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I put those journals in the garage sale because I was going to throw them away. Tom said no. He said someone might need them. I told him nobody needs a widow's sad scribbles. But he put them out anyway." She paused. "You're the first person who bought anything from that box. In 3 garage sales. 3 years. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not painfully. Like a window being unlatched. I needed them, I said. My English was still slow. Still full of pauses. But I didn't care anymore. I came to this country. I don't speak well. I feel alone. Your words. They helped me. They helped me understand that I'm not the only one who feels like trash." Linda reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her fingers were cold. Her grip was strong. "Listen to me," she said. "You are not trash. You are not broken. You are just learning. And learning is not a straight line. It's a mess. It's a garden full of weeds and a few tomatoes. But the tomatoes are worth it." I started crying. Not the quiet, polite tears. The ones that come with sniffles and red noses and the kind of ugly face you don't want anyone to see. Linda didn't look away. She just kept her hand on mine. "When my husband died," she said, "I forgot how to talk. I would open my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I lost my voice. Because I lost the reason to use it. You haven't lost your reason. You're here. You're trying. That's everything." That was my first real English lesson. Not from a teacher. Not from an app. From a widow in a yellow sweater who told me that the purpose of language isn't perfection. It's connection. And connection doesn't require fluency. It requires courage. I stayed at Linda's house for 2 hours. She told me about her daughter, still not speaking to her, but Linda hadn't given up hope. She showed me her tomato plants, small but alive. She asked me about my life, my country, my own reasons for coming to America. I answered in my broken, imperfect, stumbling English. And she listened. Really listened. Not like she was waiting for me to finish. Like she was hungry for my words, no matter how they came out. Before I left, she hugged me. Her shoulder was bony. Her sweater smelled like lavender. And she whispered in my ear, "Keep the last notebook. Finish it. And when you're done, write your own story. Someone out there needs to read it." I walked back to my car holding that wooden box like it was made of gold. Because it was. Not because of the paper. Because of what the paper had taught me. That the trash we throw away, the journals, the mistakes, the broken sentences, the messy feelings, is often the treasure someone else has been praying for. And that includes you. Learning English by heart, not by head. What if I told you that the best way to learn English has almost nothing to do with studying, and almost everything to do with becoming a little kid? Again? Not the fun parts of childhood. Not the ice cream and cartoons. The embarrassing parts. The parts where you fall down in front of everyone. The parts where you say the wrong thing and people laugh. The parts where you don't know the rules yet, so you just try. After I met Linda, something shifted inside me. Not overnight. Not like a light switch. More like a sunrise, slow, gradual, almost invisible until suddenly the whole room was bright. I stopped trying to learn English the right way. You know what the right way looks like. Textbooks with chapters. Grammar exercises with red pen corrections. Vocabulary lists sorted by theme, at the airport, at the restaurant, at the doctor's office. I had spent hundreds of dollars on those books. Hours of my life filling in blanks. And for what? So I could freeze like a deer in headlights every time a real human being asked me a real question? That's not learning. That's performing. And performing is exhausting. Linda never performed. Her journal wasn't written for a grade. It was written for her life. And that's why I understood it. That's why I felt it. She wasn't trying to be correct. She was trying to be real. So I decided to copy her. Not her handwriting. Her fearlessness. Here's what I did. Every night, after work, I sat down with the third notebook, Linda's last one, and I read one page out loud. Not silently. Out loud. With my voice. Even though I lived alone and the walls were thin and I sounded ridiculous. The first night, I read, "Today I went to the hardware store. A man asked me for help finding a hammer. I showed him where they were. He said thank you. I said you're welcome." That was the first time I said, "You're welcome," since the funeral. I read it 3 times. Each time, I tried to match the rhythm I imagined Linda using. Slow. Paused. A little sad but trying to be okay. My pronunciation was terrible. My accent was thick. But something strange happened. By the 3rd time, I wasn't reading the words anymore. I was feeling them. The way Linda must have felt when she wrote them. The small victory of a normal interaction. The quiet pride of helping someone find a hammer. That's the secret that no language app will ever sell you. Pronunciation doesn't come from your mouth. It comes from your heart. When you feel the emotion behind the words, your mouth just follows. Not perfectly. But authentically. And authenticity is what makes people want to listen to you. I started reading Linda's journal out loud every single night. Page by page. Sometimes the same page twice if it moved me. And I stopped caring about my mistakes. Because Linda made mistakes too. Her grammar was full of small errors. She used good when well was correct. She said, "I didn't had," instead of, "I didn't have." But none of that stopped her from being understood. None of that made her story less powerful. If Linda could be imperfect and still matter, so could I. There's actual science behind this. A 2023 study from the University of California found that language learners who practice speaking emotionally charged sentences that made them feel something, showed 63% faster improvement in fluency than learners who practice neutral, textbook sentences. Why? Because emotional activation triggers the hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for memory. When you feel something, you remember it. When you don't feel anything, you forget it. That's why you can watch a movie in English and remember entire lines of dialogue years later. But you can't remember the vocabulary list you studied last Tuesday. Because the movie made you feel. The vocabulary list didn't. So I stopped studying vocabulary lists. I stopped doing grammar exercises. I stopped trying to be perfect. Instead, I became a copycat. A parrot. A little kid who doesn't know the rules yet but keeps talking anyway. Every morning, I listened to Linda's voice in my head. Not her real voice, I never heard it, but the voice I imagined. Soft. Patient. Unhurried. And I repeated her sentences while I made breakfast. While I brushed my teeth. While I walked to the bus stop. The tomatoes grew. I cried. I don't know why. Carol doesn't push. She just sits. Sometimes she holds my hand. I laughed today. I covered my mouth because I forgot what my laugh sounded like. These sentences became my mantras. Simple. Short. Full of life. And slowly, without me noticing at first, they started to change the way I thought. I stopped translating in my head before I spoke. That was the biggest shift. For 18 months, every conversation had been a two-step process. First, think in my native language. Second, translate to English. By the time I finished step 2, the conversation had moved on without me. But reading Linda's journal out loud, over and over, until her sentence patterns became automatic, started to bypass the translation step. Her words became my words. Her rhythm became my rhythm. Not because I memorized them. Because I absorbed them. Like a sponge doesn't memorize water. It just soaks it up. That's how children learn language, by the way. They don't study grammar. They listen. They repeat. They make mistakes. They get corrected gently or not at all. And within a few years, they're fluent. Not because they're smart. Because they're brave. They don't care about looking stupid. They just want to communicate. Somewhere between becoming an adult and becoming an English learner, I lost that bravery. I started caring too much about being right. And caring about being right is the fastest way to never speak at all. Linda's journal gave me back my bravery. Not because she was a perfect writer. Because she was a real one. And real is always better than perfect. After 2 weeks of reading out loud every night, I did something I hadn't done since arriving in America. I called a phone number. A real phone number. For a real person. And I left a voicemail. It was for Linda. I had gotten her number from Tom, the old man. I didn't have anything important to say. I just wanted to thank her. Hi Linda, I said. My voice shook. It's the woman from the garage sale. The one who bought your box. I just wanted to tell you. I finished your 3rd notebook. And I'm writing my own story now. Like you said. Thank you for not throwing your words away. They saved me. I hung up before I could overthink it. She called me back an hour later. She was crying. Happy crying. And she said, "You saved me too." I didn't know anyone would ever read my words. I didn't know anyone would care. You made me feel like my life mattered. That's the moment I understood the full truth of the garage sale. One person's trash isn't just another person's treasure. Sometimes, one person's trash is another person's reason to keep living. And that's not English practice. That's something much bigger. Love finds you anyway. Here's something I never expected to tell you. While I was learning English from a widow's old journals, a man was falling in love with my broken sentences. His name was David. He lived 2 houses down from Linda. I met him on one of my walks to visit her, the walks that had become my favorite part of the week. Because Linda always had tea and always listened and never once corrected my grammar. David was fixing his mailbox. That's how I remember him. Bent over a wooden post with a screwdriver in one hand and a confused look on his face. He was tall. Messy brown hair. A t-shirt that said something about a band I'd never heard of. I almost walked past. That was my default setting back then. Walk past, look down, don't make eye contact, don't risk having to speak. But Linda had been working on me. She kept saying, "You have a voice. Use it. Even if it shakes." So I stopped. "Your mailbox," I said. "It's broken?" Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. For words, and I'd already stated the obvious. David looked up. He didn't laugh. He smiled. A real smile, not the polite one people give when they're trying to escape a conversation. "Yeah," he said. "A kid on a bike ran into it yesterday. He's fine. The mailbox isn't." I understood every word. Simple vocabulary. Clear pronunciation. No idioms. No slang. David wasn't talking down to me. He was just talking. Normally. Like I was a normal person who deserved normal conversation. That shouldn't have felt revolutionary. But it did. "I'm David," he said, sticking out his hand. His palm was warm and calloused. "You're Linda's friend, right? She talks about you all the time." My heart did a little flip. Not romantic yet. Just seen. Someone had noticed me. Someone had mentioned me in conversation. I existed in this neighborhood. I mattered enough to be talked about. "I'm her friend, yes," I said. "My name is..." And then my brain did the thing it always did. The freeze. The panic. The sudden inability to remember my own name. I stood there, mouth open, face getting red, while David waited patiently. "Take your time," he said. "No rush." No one had ever said that to me before. Every other conversation I'd had in America felt like a race. Speak faster. Respond quicker. Don't make people wait. But David just stood there, screwdriver in hand, looking at me like he had all day. "My name is..." "Sarah," I finally said. It wasn't my real name. I'm using a different name here for privacy. But in that moment, saying any name at all felt like climbing a mountain. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," David said. "Want to help me fix this mailbox?" I have no idea what I'm doing. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not a nervous giggle. A real, surprised, belly laugh. And I said yes. We spent 45 minutes fixing that mailbox. Mostly David fixed it while I handed him screws and tried not to hand him the wrong ones. We talked about small things. The weather. Linda's tomatoes. His dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, who kept trying to eat the screwdriver. My English was still slow. Still full of pauses. Still wrong in ways I noticed but couldn't fix. But David didn't seem to mind. He filled the silences naturally. He asked easy questions. He never once said, "What?" or "Huh?" or made me repeat myself. After we finished, he said, "I'm making dinner tonight. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti. You want to come?" I wanted to say yes. But fear grabbed my throat. What if I couldn't understand him? What if he asked me a question and I froze? What if I said something embarrassing and ruined everything? Maybe, I said. I'm not good at talking. For a long time. In English. David leaned against his fixed mailbox. He looked at me with eyes that were kind but not pitying. Sarah, he said, I don't need you to be good at talking. I just need you to show up. That sentence changed my life. Not because it was beautiful. Because it was true. All my life, I had believed that I had to be good enough before I deserved connection. Good enough at English. Good enough at conversation. Good enough at being interesting. But David was telling me the opposite. He was telling me that showing up, imperfect, scared, slow, was enough. I went to dinner. The spaghetti was fine. The conversation was better. David asked about my country, my family, my favorite foods. I answered in short sentences. Sometimes in sentence fragments. Sometimes in just one word. But I kept answering. And David kept listening. At one point, I couldn't remember the word for spoon. I pointed at the spoon. David handed it to me and said, "This is a spoon. Now you know. Next time, you'll remember." He didn't make it weird. He didn't turn it into a lesson. He just helped. Like helping was the most natural thing in the world. That night, I walked home feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I had fallen in love. Because I had been seen. My broken English hadn't scared David away. If anything, it had made him more patient. More present. More real. Here's the science behind what happened. A 2024 study from the Journal of Language and Social Psychology found that listeners actually prefer speakers who make occasional errors over speakers who are perfectly fluent. Why? Because errors signal authenticity. Errors signal vulnerability. Errors signal that the speaker is human, not a robot. And humans connect with humans. Robots, not so much. David didn't love me because of my English. But my English, my imperfect, stumbling, brave English, gave him a door to walk through. Because every time I made a mistake, I showed him who I really was. Not a polished performer. A real person. Trying. Failing. Trying again. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more. Walks with biscuit. Coffee at the diner. Sitting on Linda's porch, the three of us, watching the sun go down. David never rushed me. Never corrected me. Never made me feel like I was less than. One night, sitting on his porch swing, I said something I never thought I'd say in English. David. I think. I love you. It came out wrong. The grammar was weird. The timing was awkward. But David turned to me, took my hand, and said, "I love you too, Sarah. And I love the way you say it. Because it took courage. And courage is beautiful." That was the moment I stopped being an English learner. Not because I had mastered the language. Because I had finally understood what language is for. Not tests. Not perfection. Not impressing strangers. Love. Language is for love. And love doesn't care about your accent. Marriage without perfection. You know what's scarier than saying, "I love you," in a second language? Saying, "I do," in front of 50 people who all speak English better than you. But let me back up a little. David and I dated for 14 months before he proposed. 14 months of walks, dinners, arguments about which movie to watch, and 1,000 small moments where my English failed me and he didn't care. He proposed on Linda's porch, because of course he did. That porch had become sacred ground for us. The place where two lonely people, me and Linda, had first become friends. The place where David and I had spent countless evenings watching fireflies and saying nothing at all. He didn't get down on one knee. That's not David. He just handed me a ring in a small blue box and said, "I'm not good with speeches. But I'm good at showing up. Will you let me show up for the rest of your life?" I cried. Linda cried. Even Biscuit the golden retriever seemed to understand something important was happening. And I said yes. In English. With a shaky voice and tears running down my face and absolutely no concern for whether my grammar was correct. Because here's the truth about proposals. Nobody remembers the grammar. They remember the feeling. The wedding planning was a different kind of challenge. David wanted something small. I wanted something even smaller. Neither of us wanted a big white dress or 100 guests or a photographer telling us where to stand. We just wanted each other. And Linda. And maybe some cake. But there was one thing I was terrified about. The vows. In an American wedding, the couple usually writes their own vows. Short promises to each other. A few sentences about love and commitment and all that beautiful stuff. I had watched dozens of wedding videos online, don't judge me, and every single couple spoke perfect, fluent, emotional English. They used words like cherish and honor and eternally. Beautiful words. Words I didn't know how to say without sounding like I was reading a script. I tried writing my vows 2 months before the wedding. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, not Linda's notebook, my own, and I stared at a blank page for 45 minutes. Every sentence I wrote felt wrong. Too simple. Too short. Not poetic enough. Not American enough. I called Linda. "I can't do this," I said. "I don't have the words." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sarah, do you remember the first sentence I wrote in my journal? My name is Linda. I am not a writer." That's right. I wasn't a writer. But I wrote anyway. Because the words didn't need to be beautiful. They just needed to be true. Your vows don't need to be perfect. They just need to be yours. I hung up and looked at the blank page again. Then I wrote the simplest sentences I could think of. No big vocabulary. No fancy grammar. Just the truth. David. Before you, I was scared to speak. Now I'm still scared. But I speak anyway. Because you listen. I don't know all the English words. But I know the word home. And you are home. I promise to keep trying. Every day. Even when I make mistakes. Especially when I make mistakes. You showed me that love doesn't need perfect sentences. Love just needs to show up. So I promise to show up. Always. That was it. 4 sentences. No cherish. No eternally. Just me. My broken English. My whole heart. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October. Linda's backyard. She had spent weeks cleaning it up, pulling weeds, planting flowers, hanging string lights between the tomato plants. There were maybe 20 people there. David's family. A few neighbors. Tom the old man from the garage sale, wearing a suit that was too big for him. And Linda, of course, standing right next to me like a second mother. I wore a simple white dress I found at a thrift store. David wore a blue button-down shirt and jeans because he refused to wear anything fancier. The officiant was a friend of David's, a woman named Carla who spoke slowly and clearly and kept looking at me with encouraging eyes. When it was time for vows, David went first. His voice was steady. His sentences were beautiful but not showy. He said things that made me cry and made his mother cry and made Biscuit bark because he didn't understand why everyone was crying. Then it was my turn. My hands were shaking. The paper with my vows was shaking. My voice, when it came out, was barely a whisper. David. Before you, I was scared to speak. I stopped. Forgot the next line. Stared at the paper. Felt 50 eyes, no, 20 eyes, but it felt like 50, watching me. Waiting. And then Linda coughed. Not a real cough. A pretend cough. And she mouthed the words, "But I speak anyway. But I speak anyway," I repeated. Because you listen. The rest came out slowly. One sentence at a time. Pauses between each one. My accent thick. My grammar strange. My voice cracking on the word, home, because that word meant more to me than any other word in any language. When I finished, David didn't clap. He didn't say, "Good job." He just stepped forward, took my face in his hands, and kissed me. Right there in front of everyone. And when he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "That was perfect," he said. "You were perfect. Here's what I want you to understand about that day. Not a single person in that backyard criticized my English. Not one." David's mother hugged me and said she'd never heard more beautiful vows. Tom the old man shook my hand and said I had a good heart. Linda just smiled and squeezed my arm and didn't say anything because she didn't need to. The fear of being judged for my English, that fear lived entirely inside my own head. It always had. Everyone else? They just wanted to connect. They just wanted to love me. They didn't care if I said, "I love you," or "I am loving you," or "me love you." They understood. A 2025 study from the American Council on Foreign Language Learning found that 92% of native English speakers report that they do not notice, or do not care about, grammar errors when someone is speaking emotionally. 92%. That means when you're sharing your heart, almost no one is judging your verb tenses. They're too busy feeling what you're feeling. I wish I'd known that statistic before my wedding. I wish I'd known it before every conversation where I stayed silent because I was afraid. But I know it now. And I want you to know it too. After the ceremony, we ate cake. Linda's homemade carrot cake, which was slightly burned on one side but delicious anyway. David's dad gave a speech that went on too long. Biscuit stole a napkin and ran around the yard like a maniac. And I sat in a folding chair, holding my husband's hand, watching the string lights blink on as the sun went down. I thought about the garage sale. The rainy Saturday. The wooden box I almost didn't see. Linda's journals. Her simple sentences. Her broken heart healing one word at a time. I thought about how far I'd come. Not in English fluency. In courage. Because that's the real measure of progress. Not how many words you know. How many times you're willing to use them anyway. David leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Happy?" I looked at him. At Linda. At the tomato plant still growing in October. At the string lights and the cake crumbs and the dog with a napkin in his mouth. "Yes," I said. One word. Perfectly imperfect. Me too, he said. And that was our marriage without perfection. No big speeches. No flawless English. Just two people showing up for each other, one imperfect sentence at a time. Raising kids, raising yourself. The moment my first child said, "Mama," in English, I realized I had been teaching myself the wrong lesson all along. Let me explain. 2 years after the wedding, we had a daughter. We named her Lily. She came into the world with a full head of dark hair and a scream that could wake the neighbors 3 houses down. David cried. I cried. Linda cried. Even Biscuit seemed emotional, though that might have been because Lily smelled like milk and he wanted to lick her. The first year was a blur of diapers, sleepless nights, and the strange realization that I was now responsible for teaching a tiny human how to speak. Not just any language. 2 languages. My native language and English. I had big plans. I read all the parenting books. I watched YouTube videos about bilingual children. I made flashcards. I created schedules, mornings in my language, afternoons in English, evenings in both. I was going to be the perfect bilingual mom. My daughter would grow up fluent, confident, and completely unstoppable. Then Lily turned 2. And she refused to speak any language. Not completely. She said no about 1,000 times a day. She said more when she wanted more crackers. She said up when she wanted to be carried. But actual sentences? Real conversation? Nothing. Just silence and pointing and the occasional frustrated scream when I didn't understand what she wanted. I panicked. What if she never talks? What if I broke her? What if my bad English confused her brain? I called Linda, because that's what I did every time I panicked about anything. Linda, she's 2.5 and she won't talk. The other kids in her playgroup are saying full sentences. One kid said, "I want the blue cup please," yesterday. Lily just pointed at the cup and grunted. Linda laughed. Sarah, do you remember how long it took you to speak English comfortably? Years. And how old were you? 28. Lily is 2. She's not broken. She's just listening. That's what children do. They listen for a long, long time. Then one day, they surprise you. Linda was right, of course. Linda was always right. A few weeks later, I was in the kitchen making dinner. David was at work. Lily was playing on the floor with her stuffed animals. I wasn't paying attention. I was chopping vegetables and thinking about nothing important when I heard a small voice behind me. Mama. Tomato. Grow. Like Linda's. I dropped the knife. Turned around. Lily was holding a toy tomato, a red plush ball that came with her play food set, and looking at me with her big brown eyes. What did you say, baby? Tomato grow. Like Linda's. Mama, we go Linda's. See tomatoes? Full sentences. Multiple sentences. Past tense. Future intention. All in English. From a child who, according to my panicked brain, couldn't speak at all. I scooped her up and cried into her hair. She patted my face and said, "Mama crying. Sad. No, baby. Happy. Mama is very happy." That was the day I learned something that changed everything about how I thought about language. Children don't learn to speak because we teach them. They learn because they listen. And then one day, when they're ready, they speak. All those months of flashcards and schedules and worrying? They didn't matter. What mattered was that Lily had been listening to me talk to David, to Linda, to the cashier at the grocery store. She had been absorbing English like a sponge absorbs water. Not studying it. Living it. And that's exactly how I had learned English from Linda's journals. Not by studying. By living. By listening. By letting the words soak in until they became part of me. After Lily started talking, she didn't stop. She talked constantly. About everything. The color of the sky. The shape of a leaf. Whether Biscuit was happy or sad. And somewhere in all that talking, I noticed something remarkable. Lily made mistakes. Lots of mistakes. She said "goed" instead of "went." She said "foots" instead of "feet." She mixed up her pronouns. But she never hesitated. She never froze. She never said, "I'm sorry, my English is bad." She just kept talking, kept making mistakes, kept being understood. I asked her once, "Lily, doesn't it bother you when you say the wrong word?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "No, Mama. I just say the right word next time. That's it. That's the whole secret." Children don't fear mistakes because they haven't been taught to fear them yet. They understand something that most adults forget: mistakes are not failures. Mistakes are practice. A 2024 study from the Harvard Graduate School of Education compared how children and adults learn second languages. The children made more errors per minute than the adults, significantly more. But the children also improved faster. Why? Because the adults spent more time thinking about their errors. The children spent more time making errors and moving on. The adults tried to be perfect. The children just tried. Lily taught me that. My 2-year-old daughter, with her "goed" and her "foots" and her complete lack of self-consciousness, was a better language learner than I had ever been. Because she wasn't afraid to sound ridiculous. So I started copying her. At the grocery store, when I couldn't find the word for cilantro, I didn't freeze. I pointed and said, "The green leaves. For soup. Please." The cashier understood. No one laughed. At the park, when another mom asked me a question I didn't fully understand, I didn't pretend to understand. I said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again? Slower?" She did. We had a conversation. We became friends. At home, when I was tired and my English was even worse than usual, I didn't apologize to David. I just kept talking. And he kept listening. Lily is 7 now. She speaks both languages fluently, switching between them without thinking, like a tiny translator. She corrects my English sometimes, gently, kindly, and I let her. Because she's right. And because I'm no longer afraid to be wrong. Here's what I want you to take from this section, especially if you're a parent or planning to become one. You don't have to be a perfect English speaker to raise a perfect English speaker. You just have to be brave. Children don't learn from perfection. They learn from effort. They learn from watching you try, fail, and try again. Every time you stumble over a word and keep going, you're not embarrassing yourself. You're teaching your child the most important lesson there is: courage matters more than correctness. Lily doesn't remember the times I said the wrong word. She remembers the times I read her bedtime stories in English, slowly and carefully, with all my mistakes. She remembers the times I sang to her off-key. She remembers the times I said, "I love you," with my thick accent and meant every syllable. That's the legacy of learning a second language. Not fluency. Connection. And that's what Linda taught me. That's what David taught me. That's what Lily taught me. So if you're watching this and you have children, or nieces, or nephews, or students, stop worrying about whether your English is good enough for them. It is. What they need isn't perfect grammar. What they need is you. Showing up. Trying. And showing them that being brave is better than being right. Going back to that garage sale. 5 years after I bought a wooden box for $3, I walked past that same house on a Saturday morning. And I almost didn't recognize it. Not because the house had changed. Because I had. The garage sale was still there. Same driveway. Same folding tables. Same cardboard sign with wobbly letters that said, "Everything must go." But this time, I wasn't lost. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't running away from my English textbook. I was just walking. With my daughter Lily holding my left hand and David holding my right. Biscuit was long gone, old age had taken him the year before, but we had a new dog now. A ridiculous mutt named Pickle who was currently trying to eat a pine cone. Tom the old man was still running the sale. He looked older, obviously. Grayer. Slower. But his eyes lit up when he saw me. Sarah. Linda's girl. He came over and gave me a hug that smelled like coffee and sawdust. I was just thinking about you the other day. Linda talks about you all the time. You're famous in the neighborhood, you know. I laughed. Famous for what? For showing up. For not giving up. For being the one person who saw treasure in that old box. He pointed to a corner of the driveway. And there it was. Another wooden box. Not the same one, that one was on my bookshelf at home, holding Linda's journals like a shrine. But a similar one. Older. More beat up. With a handwritten sign taped to the side, "Free. Take me home." Lily tugged my sleeve. "Mama, can we take that box? Maybe there's another Linda inside." Kids say the most profound things without even trying. I walked over to the box. Squatted down. Lifted the lid. Inside were more notebooks. Different handwriting. A different story waiting to be read by someone who needed it. I didn't take the box. Not that day. But I smiled at it. Because I knew someone else would. Someone who was feeling the way I felt 5 years ago. Someone who thought their English was too broken, their life too small, their hope too faded. Someone who needed to hear that trash can become treasure. Tom asked me if I wanted to see Linda. Of course I did. She was inside the house. She didn't come to garage sales anymore, he said. Her knees were bad. But she was still gardening. Still drinking tea. Still writing in her journals, though she didn't show them to anyone. I left David and Lily outside to browse the tables. Lily was already negotiating with Tom over a stuffed bear that was missing an eye, and I walked up to Linda's front door. The same door. The same wreath, though the flowers had been replaced with new ones. The same knock. The footsteps were slower now. But the voice was the same. Coming. Hold your horses. The door opened. Linda looked older. More wrinkles. More gray hair. But her eyes, those eyes that had seen so much loss and so much healing, were brighter than I remembered. "Sarah," she said. Not surprised. Not emotional. Just certain. Like she had been expecting me. "Hi, Linda. You came back." "I always come back." She stepped aside. "I'll make tea." We sat in the same living room. Same couch. Same blanket over the same stain. Same clock ticking too loudly. But something was different. The photographs on the shelf had multiplied. Pictures of Lily. Pictures of David and me at our wedding. Pictures of Linda holding Lily when she was a baby. Pictures of Tom and Linda at some neighborhood barbecue. Linda wasn't alone anymore. And neither was I. She poured the tea. Lipton. Nothing fancy. Then she looked at me across the table and said, "Tell me your story. The whole thing. From the beginning." I took a breath. And I started talking. I came to this country not knowing anyone. Not knowing how to say anything without freezing. I was so scared, Linda. Every day. For 18 months, I was scared. Linda nodded. She didn't interrupt. Then I found your box. Your journals. And I read them. Not because I wanted to learn English. Because I wanted to know if someone else had ever felt as lost as I did. And what did you find? I found you. A woman who had lost everything and kept going anyway. A woman who planted tomatoes when she couldn't plant anything else. A woman who wrote sentences so simple and so honest that I understood them on the first try. You didn't teach me English, Linda. You taught me that I deserved to be heard. Linda's eyes were wet. But she was smiling. And then I met David. A man who didn't care about my accent. Who listened to my broken sentences like they were poetry. Who proposed on your porch because your porch was the first place I ever felt safe. And then we had Lily. And she taught me that mistakes are just practice. That children don't wait until they're perfect to speak. They just speak. And the world listens anyway. I paused. Looked down at my tea. Looked back up at Linda. And now I'm here. 5 years later. And I can tell you my whole story. In English. Without freezing. Without translating in my head. Just talking. Like I always wanted to. Linda reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were still cold. Her grip was still strong. "Sarah," she said, "do you remember what you said to me the first time we met?" I said, "Thank you, Linda. Wherever you are." No. Before that. When you knocked on my door. You said I needed them. Your words. They helped me understand that I'm not the only one who feels like trash. I nodded. I remembered. "Well," Linda said, "now it's your turn. Someone out there needs your words. Someone who feels like trash. Someone who thinks they'll never learn English. Someone who is standing in front of a garage sale right now, looking at a box, wondering if it's worth $3. She squeezed my hand. "You're not just my student anymore, Sarah. You're my friend. And you're a teacher now. Whether you like it or not." I laughed. Cried a little. Drank my tea. And when I walked out of Linda's house that day, holding my daughter's hand and my husband's hand, I understood something I'd been too blind to see before. The garage sale was never about the box. It was about the hope. The belief that something discarded could be precious. That someone broken could be whole. That some story, written in shaky handwriting, full of mistakes, soaked in tears, could save a life. I didn't take the new box home that day. But I thought about it. And the next morning, I went back. I opened it. Read the first page of the first notebook. It was a different story. A different kind of pain. A different voice. But the same simple English. The same honest sentences. The same quiet hope. And I thought, someone needs this. Someone is waiting for this. So I bought the box. Not for me. For the next person. The one who doesn't know yet that their treasure is hiding in someone else's trash. I left it on a bench at the public library with a note taped to the lid. This box changed my life. Maybe it will change yours. Read slowly. Be brave. And remember, you are not trash. You are treasure waiting to be found. Your turn to start. So here we are. The end of my story. Which means, if you've been paying attention, this is actually the beginning of yours. I've told you about a rainy Saturday, a wooden box, and a woman named Linda who wrote her broken heart onto yellow pages. I've told you about David, who fell in love with my imperfect sentences. About Lily, who taught me that mistakes are just practice. About a garage sale that turned out to be a treasure hunt for hope itself. But now I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly. Not out loud, unless you want to, but in the quiet place inside your chest where your real thoughts live. What's your garage sale? What's the thing you've been walking past because it looks like trash? What's the box you haven't opened because you're afraid the words inside will be too hard? What's the story you're not telling because your English isn't good enough yet? Because here's what I know after 5 years of learning to speak again. The only thing standing between you and fluency is the belief that you need to be ready before you start. You don't. Linda wasn't ready to write her journal. She was just desperate. I wasn't ready to read it. I was just lonely. David wasn't ready to love someone who said, "I love you," with the wrong grammar. He just showed up anyway. Lily wasn't ready to speak in full sentences. She just opened her mouth and let the words fall out however they came. None of us were ready. But we started anyway. And starting, not finishing, not perfecting, not mastering, starting is the only thing that ever made a difference. I want you to do something today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Go find your garage sale. Maybe it's a real place. A thrift store. A used bookstore. A library shelf with discarded novels. Maybe it's a website where people share their old journals or letters or diaries. Maybe it's a YouTube channel, this one, for example, where someone tells real stories in simple English. Maybe it's not a thing at all. Maybe it's a person. A neighbor. A coworker. A stranger at the coffee shop who looks as lost as you feel. Maybe your garage sale is just the courage to say one sentence to someone who might understand. But here's the rule. Whatever you find, you have to read it. Or listen to it. Or say it out loud. And you can't worry about the mistakes. Because mistakes are not the enemy of learning. Silence is. Fear is. Waiting until you're ready is. I learned that from a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old who said, "Goed," instead of "went," and didn't apologize. A 2-year-old who understood something that most adults spend their whole lives missing. The goal of language is not to be correct. The goal of language is to be connected. When you say, "I go to the store," and the person you're talking to understands that you went to the store, congratulations. You just succeeded at language. The grammar was wrong. The connection was right. And connection is what matters. I'm not saying grammar is useless. Of course it helps. Of course you should learn it. Of course there's value in getting better. But grammar is not the door. Grammar is the window dressing. The door is courage. And courage doesn't require a single correct preposition. Let me give you a challenge. Right now. Before you close this video. Write one sentence in English. One sentence. It can be about anything. How you feel. What you had for breakfast. Something you're afraid of. Something you hope for. Write it in the comments below. I read every comment. Not because I'm checking your grammar, I promise you, I don't care about your grammar. I care about your courage. Write one sentence. Even if it's wrong. Especially if it's wrong. Because that wrong sentence is your first step. And the first step is always the hardest and the most important. Here's what I've learned about people who learn English as a second language. The ones who succeed aren't the smartest. They aren't the ones with the best memory or the most expensive courses. They're the ones who refuse to be silent. They're the ones who make mistakes in public and keep talking anyway. They're the ones who understand that every wrong sentence is just a not yet right sentence. You know who else made mistakes? Every single native English speaker you've ever admired. Every author. Every actor. Every president. Every teacher. They all started as children who said foots and goed and I runned. They all made thousands of mistakes before they made a single correct sentence. The only difference between them and the people who gave up. They didn't stop. So please. Don't stop. If you're watching this and you feel like you've been trying for years and getting nowhere, good. That means you're in the messy middle. That's exactly where growth happens. Not at the beginning, when everything is new and exciting. Not at the end, when everything is easy. In the middle. The boring, frustrating, embarrassing middle where nothing seems to work and you want to quit. That's where Linda was when she started writing. That's where I was when I bought that box. That's where David was when he was fixing his mailbox alone. That's where Lily was before she said her first sentence. The middle is not failure. The middle is the workout. The middle is where your brain is building new pathways, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Trust the process. Trust the middle. I want to leave you with something Linda said to me the last time I saw her. I was complaining about something, I don't even remember what, and she looked at me with those tired, bright eyes and said, "Sarah, do you know why tomatoes grow so well after a storm? Because the rain makes the roots reach deeper. The same rain that feels like drowning is the rain that makes you strong." Your English struggles right now? They're not drowning you. They're making your roots reach deeper. Every time you freeze in a conversation, every time you forget a word, every time you feel stupid, your brain is reaching. Growing. Getting stronger. You don't see it yet. But it's happening. So here's my final question for you. And I want you to really sit with it. What if someone's trash is your treasure? What if your own broken English, the thing you're most ashamed of, is actually the thing that will connect you to the people you're meant to love? The life you're meant to live, the story you're meant to tell? What if you're not trash at all? What if you're treasure, waiting for someone brave enough to look past the surface? That someone starts with you. Go find your garage sale. Open the box. Read the words. Say them out loud. Make mistakes. Feel stupid. Keep going. And one day, sooner than you think, You'll look back at this video and realize that the person who couldn't speak at all is now telling their own story. Just like I'm telling you mine. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trying. Thank you for being brave enough to still be here at the end of this video. Now go write that sentence. I'll be waiting in the comments. So you made it to the end. That means something. That means you're still hoping. Still trying. Still believing that somewhere inside your broken sentences, your messy grammar, your embarrassing pauses, there's a treasure waiting to be found. But here's the truth I haven't told you yet. Linda's journals? There were actually 4 notebooks. Not 3. The 4th one. I never opened it. Not because I was afraid. Because I'm saving it. For the right moment. For the next chapter of my story, the one I haven't even lived yet. And that's the secret I'm leaving you with today. Your English story isn't over. It hasn't even begun. The best sentences you'll ever speak haven't left your mouth yet. The most beautiful words you'll ever hear are still on their way. So here's my challenge. Don't just watch this video. Don't just nod and feel inspired and then close your laptop. Do something. Write that sentence. Find your garage sale. Open your own box. And come back here next week, because I'm going to tell you what was in Linda's 4th notebook. You don't want to miss that. Trust me. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell. Because the best part of this story? It hasn't been told yet. See you in the next video. Same place. Same hope. New words. Subscribe now, your treasure is waiting.